All right. Hi there. We're going to talk a little bit about structure and change. We're not talking about change in this audio, though, as that is actually the second part of this chapter, but organizational structure and organizational change. So, two big topics in this chapter, and we typically pair these topics together because a lot of the time the structure of the organization, which is visualized by an organizational chart, is what's changed. So, a lot of the time when organizations and companies are not meeting their financial goals, one of the things that will happen is that they will restructure the organization. So, that's why we talk about the two together. But we also know from other conversations that we have had, you and I, that there's a lot of things that can change. Behavior can change, people can change, processes can change, teams can change. So, not just structure. So, it's just the setup of the textbook that we talk about change together with structure. So, where does change and structure sit within the planning, organizing, leading, controlling framework, or POLC? So, if you look at the second category here, organization, that's where we find organizational design. And design is what we do when we put a structure together. We design it, right? And so, what is a structure? Well, a structure is how we coordinate work among people and teams within organizations. So organizations come together, people come together in organizations to get work done, and that work has to be coordinated. Who works with who speaks with who reports to who. And that is what we are actually seeing in organizational structure. And so we are obviously doing this to make sure we meet our goals in the organization. And we also know that organizational structures can have a lot of influence on people in the organization, their happiness, their productivity. And the reason for this is that we don't always, or not all of us, fit into all structures, I should say. Some structures are really tall, hierarchical, a lot of levels of managers. And if you are more of a free flowing personality, you like to make your own decisions and not be controlled, you would not be a great fit in a tall structure. You might be better off in short, flat, organic structure where we tend to see more empowerment to employees where they have freedom in decision making. And that might be a greater fit for you. So, structure does have influence over our satisfaction as well as our productivity. So how do we build structure? There's four building blocks that we can look at in terms of putting structures together. We have centralization, formalization, hierarchical levels. That's what I just talked about with the tall and flat structures. And then we have something called departmentalization. So if you start up here with centralization, our number one building block, it basically talks about decision making. And we've talked about this before in other contexts. So decision making can either be centralized up at the top of the organization or at the bottom. So if it's at the top, I should say, then we call it centralized. And if it's at the bottom of the organization, we call it decentralized. So decentralized means that we're pushing decision making down to first level supervisors and their employees. So the people that are closest to the actions actually get to make the decisions, and that's decentralized. Formalization is the second one. So I just did that to clear the page. Formalization is the second one. And this is the extent to which we have policies, procedures, written job descriptions, and rules written down. They are in books, they're on the web, you have processes that you're following. It's very formalized. So it's the combination of written rules and explicit regulations. And so we now have predictable behavior because everybody follows the formalized processes, the formalized procedures. We have job descriptions that clearly tell us what to do, as opposed to an organization where we have little formalization or no formalization. And that would be an organization where people get to use their own best judgment. The third one is the tall and flat structure. So our hierarchy, do you have a lot of levels with a lot of different managers, or do you have a few? So tall structures are going to be the ones that have the several layers of management between the frontline employees and up at the top executive level. And then you have the flat structures, which have fewer layers and fewer managers. So what happens in these organizations that typically, because we have fewer managers overall, we have more employees reporting to a single manager, as opposed to in a tall structure where you tend to have fewer number of employees reporting. Departmentalization is number 4, and this is how we actually cluster jobs together. So who works with who? We can either be very specialized or we can be broad-based. So a functional structure is one that's very specialized. We are grouping jobs together based on their similarity in functions. So for instance, in a large organization, maybe all HR sits together and they work on different projects and teams, but they're all still HR. And then you have the marketing department, and all marketing people sit together. So that would be a functional structure where jobs are grouped based on their functions. We also have divisional structures. Divisional structures are the one where we are functioning together, not on actual job function. So here it can be based on product, it can be based on service, it can be based on geography even. And so what's happening in this situation is that we have, for instance, say a geographic structure. So we have North America, we have South America, we have Europe. So in each one of these different geographies, we have HR, marketing, so on and so forth. So here we're putting jobs together based on something other than function. You can do it on products. So for instance, we have these global conglomerates like Johnson & Johnson and Procter & Gamble, and they might have the beauty product, and they might have the household product, and they might have the baby product. So here again, you might be working on beauty product, and you have HR, you have marketing, you have supply chain, you have R&D, and you're all together for that beauty product. That's divisional structures. So then we bring all of these building blocks together, and we get 2 general structural configurations. So we can say that organizations maybe are on the mechanistic side or on the organic side. So it's just 2 big groupings where you're more or less mechanistic, you're more or less organic. The mechanistic structure tends to be the bureaucracy. We can have tall organization with a lot of formalized rule and job descriptions. We tend to be very centralized, where the decision making is done at the top of the organization. And because of all of these things, we are better off in a stable environment, and we are not so innovative. On the positive side, we are high on efficiency, and we tend to be very cost effective. So people are doing things speedily and quickly according to processes and procedures. But when it comes time to innovate, it's not that great. So if you're in a dynamic environment that changes rapidly, like technology, for instance, being a mechanistic organization would not be a good fit, because you would die as the environment around you changes and you are not able to keep up, because you will have to keep innovating in the technological field. So for instance, you would be better off being organic, where you are more flexible and decentralized. So people make their own decisions, and you don't have to go all the way up the hierarchy to a manager for a manager to make that decision. It's better if the person who's working on the project gets to make the decision, right? So we have lower levels of formalization, so less rules. Use your best judgment. We hire people that are knowledgeable. So they have the skills. So certainly we would trust them to make the decisions. So with that, we have fluid communications lines. Job descriptions are broader. People are just doing more things. And people tend to be happier, right? So we see organic structures relating to higher levels of job satisfaction. And that is because we don't like to be controlled. We don't like to be told what to do. And so when we get to do that on our own, we tend to be happier. And clearly the organic structure also is more suited for entrepreneurial ventures and innovation. So people problem solving, finding solutions to whatever they're encountering. And so organic structures are better for that. So maybe Google here on this side, and maybe US Postal Service here on this side. So that's going to wrap it for the Introduction to org structure.